The air in the tenement apartment was always thick with the smell of cabbage and longing. For Elena Petrova, it was the scent of her entire childhood in a small industrial town in Bulgaria. Nestled in the shadow of soot-stained factories, her father worked long, back-breaking shifts in one of them, emerging each evening with a cough that rattled his frail frame and hands permanently stained with grease. Her mother, perpetually stoic, stretched every meager penny to feed 5 children. Elena, the eldest, watched it all, a quiet fire burning in her belly, a yearning for something more than the cyclical despair she saw around her. "America," her father would whisper sometimes, a faraway look in his eyes when he thought no one was listening. "A place where a man can build, where his children can breathe." It was a refrain, a prayer, a mythical land spoken of in hushed tones, by those who dared to dream beyond the iron curtain of their existence. For Elena, America wasn't just a place, it was a promise. A promise whispered in letters from a distant cousin who had made the leap years ago, boasting of endless opportunities, of schools where children learned not just to read but to think, of streets paved with possibility. The decision, when it finally came, felt less like a choice and more like a surrender to an inevitable fate. Elena was 17, barely an adult, but already carrying the weight of her family's hopes. Her father's cough had worsened, his strength failing. Her younger siblings looked to her with wide, hungry eyes. The cousins' letters, full of vivid descriptions of New York City, a kaleidoscope of lights and sounds and towering buildings, had become a beacon. "Come," the cousin wrote. "There is work. There is a future." The journey was a blur of cramped spaces, rough seas, and a gnawing fear that twisted in her stomach. She clung to a worn photograph of her family, their faces solemn, hopeful, relying on her. She had left them with a promise, a vow whispered in the final tearful embrace with her mother. "I will make it. I will send for you." It was a promise that would fuel her for decades. Ellis Island was a crucible, a cacophony of languages and emotions. The official, stern-faced and unyielding, scrawled something on her papers. "Petrova, Elena," he barked, barely looking up. She nodded, heart pounding. She was officially here, a new citizen of a new world, carrying nothing but a small, tattered suitcase and an unshakable resolve. Her cousin, Maria, was a whirlwind of energy and practicality, a seasoned veteran of this new world. Maria found her a tiny room in a crowded boarding house in the Lower East Side, a place where the walls were thin and the smells were a riot of foreign cuisines, a comfortingly familiar chaos. The first shock, after the sheer scale of the city, was the language. Elena had studied English from old, smuggled textbooks, but the rapid-fire slang, the unfamiliar accents, the sheer speed of conversations left her bewildered. She felt like a deaf-mute, constantly smiling and nodding, hoping to mask her confusion. Work, Maria assured her, was plentiful, but plentiful meant grueling. Elena's first job was in a garment factory, a noisy, dusty inferno where the air vibrated with the roar of sewing machines. Her fingers, accustomed to delicate embroidery at home, now ached from pushing heavy fabrics through powerful needles, the rhythmic clang of metal echoing her own exhaustion. She worked 10, 12, sometimes 14 hours a day, hunched over, her back protesting, her eyes burning. The pay was a pittance, barely enough to cover her rent and a few scraps of food, but every week she meticulously separated a few coins, tucking them into a tin box hidden under her mattress. These were the first installments of her promise, the nascent fund for her family's passage. life settled into a harsh rhythm. Up before dawn, a quick, tasteless breakfast, the long walk to the factory, the endless whir of machines, the walk home. In the encroaching darkness, a meager supper. And then, if she wasn't too tired, she'd pull out her English primer. Slowly, painstakingly, she absorbed the new sounds, the new words. She learned phrases from her co-workers, mostly other immigrant women from Italy, Ireland, and Eastern Europe, each with their own stories of longing and sacrifice. They communicated in a broken symphony of gestures and shared glances, a universal language of hardship. Sundays were her only respite. While others went to church or socialized, Elena sought out the public library. The grand, imposing building with its endless shelves of books felt like a sanctuary, a quiet haven from the relentless city. She devoured newspapers slowly, laboriously, piecing together the headlines, the stories of this new America. She found books on history, on science, on art, worlds she had only glimpsed in her wildest dreams back home. It was there, amidst the hushed turning of pages, that she truly began to understand the vastness of the opportunities she had crossed an ocean for. She wasn't just working for survival. She was learning to thrive. Years blurred into a monotonous tapestry of work, saving, and learning. The tin box grew heavier, its contents slowly accumulating, coin by coin, bill by bill. Her letters home, sent faithfully every month, grew more confident, more descriptive. She told them of the marvels of New York, carefully omitting the parts about her aching hands and the loneliness that sometimes gnawed at her late at night. She spoke of the hope, the freedom, the boundless future. Then came the Great Depression. The factory, once a buzzing hive of activity, slowed to a crawl. Layoffs swept through like a plague. Elena, with her steady hand and unwavering dedication, was one of the last to be let go. She walked out that day with a small severance package and a profound sense of despair. Her carefully constructed world, built on the fragile foundation of hard work, threatened to crumble. The promise to her family, so close to being fulfilled, felt suddenly unreachable. But Elena Petrova was not one to break. Desperation fueled her. She took on any work she could find, cleaning houses, washing dishes in greasy diners, mending clothes for wealthy women who haggled over pennies. She went hungry often, but she never touched the money in the tin box. That money was sacred, imbued with the hopes of her family, the weight of her promise. One bitter winter evening, huddled in her unheated room, a thought sparked. She remembered the women at the factory, their complaints about stiff, uncomfortable work clothes. She remembered her own experience, her growing knowledge of fabrics and tailoring, and she remembered her mother's deft hands, turning scraps into masterpieces. Elena had always possessed an innate talent for sewing, a delicate touch her industrial work had all but crushed. With trembling hands, she invested a tiny portion of her sacred savings into a used sewing machine and a bolt of sturdy, inexpensive fabric. She began to experiment, to design. She created work aprons for the women in the boarding house, sturdy and comfortable, with reinforced pockets. Word spread. Soon, she was taking orders, not just for aprons, but for simple dresses, for tailored shirts, for children's clothes. Her small room, once just a place to sleep, transformed into a bustling workshop. It wasn't a factory, but it was hers. She worked harder than ever, often through the night. But now there was a different kind of exhaustion, one tinged with satisfaction. The tin box continued to fill, faster now, with the fruits of her own enterprise. The letters home grew bolder. "Soon," she wrote, her hand firm. "Soon." Finally, after nearly 15 years of relentless struggle, the day arrived. The tin box was full. More than full. Enough for passage, enough for a small apartment, enough for a fresh start. She wrote to her family, a long, emotional letter, detailing the logistics, the excitement, the unburdening of a promise kept. Her mother, now a frail, silver-haired woman, and her two youngest siblings, no longer children but young adults, stepped off the ship onto American soil. Elena, older now, with lines of worry etched around her eyes but a triumphant smile on her face, saw them across the crowded pier. Tears streamed down her face, a mixture of relief, joy, and the bittersweet acknowledgement of the years lost. Her mother, her eyes glistening, simply reached out and clasped Elena's calloused hands. No words were needed. The sacrifice, the struggle, the unwavering belief in a better future. It was all there, in that silent embrace. Elena had brought her family to America. She had kept her promise. But she knew, as she led them through the bustling streets of New York, that this was just the beginning. She had laid the foundation, a solid, unyielding bedrock. Now, the real work began. Building a life, planting roots, ensuring that her family, her future generations, would never know the scent of cabbage and longing, but only the sweet perfume of freedom and endless possibility. This was her American dream, not for herself, but for them. The sewing machine was the heartbeat of the Petrova household. For Michael, born and raised in a modest brick row house in Queens, its rhythmic whir-clack-clack-whir was the first sound he heard in the morning and the last sound he heard before, drifting off to sleep. It was more constant than the rumble of the subway a few blocks away, more familiar than the calls of the street vendors outside. It was the sound of his mother's love, her determination, her unwavering promise made manifest, in thread and fabric. Elena had married Stefan, a quiet, kind man who had also fled the hardships of post-war Bulgaria. He worked at a bakery, leaving in the dark of night and returning in the afternoon, his clothes dusted with flour and the sweet smell of yeast clinging to him. Theirs was a partnership built not on grand romance, but on a shared understanding of loss, resilience, and the quiet dignity of hard work. And Michael was their American miracle. He was the reason for it all, the proof that their gamble had paid off. From his earliest years, Michael understood he was a child of two worlds. At home, the air was filled with the soft, melodic cadence of Bulgarian, the scent of his mother's kavarma stewing on the stove, and the ever-present hum of the sewing machine. Outside the front door, it was the loud, brash, English-speaking world of stickball games, comic books, and television shows that his parents watched with a mixture of amusement and bewilderment. He navigated these two worlds seamlessly, translating a teacher's note for his mother one minute and arguing about baseball statistics with his friends the next. This dual existence gave him a unique perspective. He saw the America his friends took for granted through the eyes of his parents, who still looked upon things like a fully stocked grocery store with a sense of quiet awe. His mother, Elena, never explicitly told him what she expected of him. She never had to. Her expectations were woven into the fabric of their daily lives. They were in the way her calloused fingers, roughened by years of needle pricks and fabric shears, would gently turn the page of his picture book. They were in the intensity of her gaze as she reviewed his report card, a silent scrutiny far more intimidating than any lecture. An A would earn a firm, proud nod. A B would be met with a quiet, searching look that simply asked, "Could you have done better?" One afternoon, when he was about 9, Michael found his mother slumped over her sewing machine, her eyes closed, her breathing heavy with exhaustion. A mountain of half-finished dresses for a local wedding party surrounded her. Wanting to help, he picked up a scrap of silk, threaded a needle just as he'd seen her do 1,000 times, and tried to stitch a simple seam. His stitches were clumsy, puckered, and uneven. He pricked his finger, a tiny bead of blood welling up. Elena's eyes fluttered open. She looked at his botched attempt, then at his bleeding finger. A flicker of something, sadness, maybe, or fierce resolve, crossed her face. She gently took the fabric from his small hands. "No, Misha," she said, her voice soft but firm, using his Bulgarian pet name. "Not for you. Your hands are for books, for holding a pen. Let my hands be the last in this family to do this work." She cleaned his finger and placed a bandage on it, a gesture that felt less like first aid and more like a coronation. In that moment, he understood. The sewing machine was her sacrifice, but it was also the engine driving him toward a different destiny. His job wasn't to learn her trade, it was to transcend it. School wasn't just a place to learn, it was his inheritance, the opportunity she had paid for with her youth. This inheritance was a heavy one. While his friends spent their summers running through open fire hydrants and playing until dusk, Michael's summers were filled with library books and extra math workbooks his mother would buy. He felt the weight of her unspoken dreams on his shoulders. Sometimes it felt inspiring, like he was a part of some grand, heroic story. Other times, it was suffocating. As a teenager, he yearned to be just a regular American kid, to not carry the legacy of an entire family's hopes with every test he took. He had a particularly sharp argument with her when he was 16. He wanted to try out for the basketball team, which meant hours of practice after school. To him, it was about fitting in, about being part of something. To Elena, it was a distraction. "Basketball," she'd said, her brow furrowed in disapproval. "This is a game. It will not help you get into a good university." "It's not just a game, Ma. It's what kids do here," he shot back, his voice thick with frustration. "You don't get it. You're not from here." The words hung in the air, instantly regrettable. The look on his mother's face wasn't anger. It was a deep, profound hurt that silenced him immediately. She didn't yell. She just looked at her worn hands, then back at him. "You are right," she said quietly. "I am not from here. I am from a place where a boy with a mind like yours would be sent to a factory. I came here so you could choose what to do with that mind. Do not choose to throw it away for a bouncing ball." She turned and walked back to her sewing machine, and the familiar whir-clack-clack that filled the U. Silence was a sound of finality. He never tried out for the team. The incident stuck with him. He began to see his mother not just as a parent, but as a person. A woman who had navigated a terrifying foreign world alone, who had battled poverty and loneliness, all for a future she would never personally inhabit, but could only build for him. His resentment began to morph into a deep, motivating sense of gratitude. He channeled his energy into his studies with a newfound fervor. He wasn't just studying for himself anymore. He was honoring her sacrifice. He excelled in history and literature, fascinated by the stories of how people and societies changed, of how ideas could shape the world. He discovered a passion for teaching during a peer tutoring program, finding immense satisfaction in helping a struggling classmate finally grasp a difficult concept. It felt like building something, not with fabric and thread, but with knowledge and encouragement. He realized that a teacher did for the mind what his mother did for the body. They took raw material and, with patience and skill, shaped it into something stronger, more beautiful, and more resilient. This, he decided, would be his path. It wasn't a career his mother would have ever imagined, but it was one that felt profoundly connected to her values. The day the acceptance letter from Columbia University arrived was a quiet, gray afternoon. Michael held the thick envelope in his hands, his heart hammering against his ribs. He walked into the small room that served as his mother's workshop. Elena was hunched over her machine, her brow furrowed in concentration, as she guided a delicate piece of lace under the needle. "Ma," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She looked up, her tired eyes questioning. He handed her the envelope. She wiped her hands on her apron, a habit ingrained from decades of work, before taking it. Her fingers, so deft with a needle, fumbled with the seal. She pulled out the letter, and her lips moved silently as she read the formal, dense text. Her English was good, but she read slowly, absorbing every word. Michael watched her face, waiting for a reaction. But there was no shout of joy, no grand celebration. Instead, a single tear traced a path down her weathered cheek, disappearing into the lines etched by years of worry and work. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a lifetime of pent-up emotion. She reached out, not to hug him, but to touch. The acceptance letter again, her fingers tracing the university's crest as if it were a holy relic. "My father, your grandfather," she whispered, her voice thick. "He used to say that in America, his children could breathe. I did not understand what that meant until this moment." That fall, as he packed his bags for his dorm room, the house felt strangely quiet. His mother's sewing machine had been silent for a week. She had spent the time mending his clothes and packing him snacks. Her restless energy now focused entirely on him. When the taxi pulled up, she walked him to the door. She looked small and vulnerable, standing on the porch of the little brick house that her labor had paid for. As he got into the cab, he looked back at her. She wasn't crying. She was standing tall, a look of fierce, unshakable pride on her face. For the first time in his life, he saw her not as his tireless mother, but as Elena Petrova, the 17-year-old girl who had crossed an ocean with nothing but a promise. He was the fulfillment of that promise. He was the inheritance. And, as the taxi pulled away from the curb, carrying him toward a future she had only dared to dream of, he knew he was the bridge between her world of sacrifice and the boundless world of opportunity that now lay before him. The air in the control room at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory was a low, electric hum of hushed conversations and whirring servers. Dozens of the brightest minds in the country were staring at a wall of monitors, their faces illuminated by streams of complex data cascading down the screens. At the center of it all stood Dr. Anya Sharma, her gaze fixed on the primary feed from the Deep Space Telescope. Her heart beat a steady, calm rhythm against her ribs, a counterpoint to the tense energy that filled the room. In her lab coat pocket, her fingers found the cool, smooth metal of a simple silver thimble, worn thin from decades of use. It had been her grandmother Elena's. Anya was an astrophysicist, a job so far removed from her family's origins that it felt like it belonged to another reality. Her great-grandfather had wrestled with machines of iron and grease. Her grandmother had battled looms of fabric and thread. Her father had mastered the world of books and ideas. Anya's domain was the cosmos itself. She worked with the fundamental laws of the universe, her tools being mathematics, quantum physics, and telescopes that could see back to the dawn of time. She was a cartographer of the infinite, and tonight her team was on the verge of confirming the existence of an exoplanet in the habitable zone of a star 40 light-years away, a Goldilocks world, a potential cradle for life. Her father, Michael, had been the bridge. As a history teacher, he hadn't just taught her about the rise and fall of empires. He had taught Anya her own history, framing it as the epic it was. He told her about Elena's voyage, the garment factory, the sewing machine that was the relentless engine of their family's future. He never presented it as a burden or a debt to be repaid. Instead, he framed it as a gift. "Your grandmother gave us a foundation," he'd told her when she was young, pointing to the solid floor of their home. "My job was to build the walls and the roof. Your job," he said, his eyes twinkling as he pointed to the night sky through her bedroom window, "is to paint the stars on the ceiling." Cheater. When she was 10, he'd saved up for months to buy her a small telescope. While other kids were focused on the world at their feet, Anya's world expanded with every new constellation she learned to identify. The quiet, distant stars were a comfort, a silent, beautiful puzzle waiting to be solved. Her curiosity was a fire he lovingly fanned, taking her to science museums, buying her books by Carl Sagan, and listening with genuine interest as she tried to explain black holes to him. Over dinner, he had inherited his mother's fierce dedication, but he channeled it into nurturing his daughter's boundless intellect. Now, at 34, Anya often visited her grandmother. Elena was in her 90s, a frail woman with wisps of white hair and eyes that held the faded memories of a world long past. She lived with Michael and his wife, her days spent in a comfortable armchair, the once restless energy in her hands finally stilled. The sewing machine had long ago been retired to the attic, a silent monument to a bygone era. During one visit, just a week before the final confirmation sequence, Anya sat by her grandmother's chair, holding her soft, wrinkled hand. "They are looking for your little planet tonight, Anya?" Elena asked, her voice a soft, papery whisper. Anya smiled. "Yes, Yaya. We're listening to its star, trying to see if it's really there." Elena didn't understand the science, the intricacies of transit photometry or spectroscopic analysis were a foreign language, but she understood the core of it. She looked at her granddaughter, a doctor whose name was known in scientific circles around the world, and she saw the ultimate dividend of her life's investment. She saw a confidence she had never been allowed, a freedom she had only dreamed of. "My hands," Elena said, looking down at her own fingers, now gnarled with age. "They made dresses for weddings, for baptisms, so people could feel beautiful for one day. Your hands." She trailed off, her gaze drifting toward the ceiling. "You show them new worlds." The simplicity and profundity of the statement brought a lump to Anya's throat. Her grandmother, the pragmatic seamstress, understood her work better than anyone. Back in the control room, a voice cut through the tension. "Dr. Sharma, we have signal confirmation. 3 consecutive, verified. Transits. Light curve is stable." Anya's breath caught. She stepped closer to the monitor, her eyes tracing the unmistakable dip in the star's light, the tiny eclipse caused by a planet passing in front of it. It was real. A wave of hushed celebration rippled through the room. Clapping, cheers, handshakes. Anya felt a colleague pat her on the back, but she was somewhere else entirely. In that moment of profound, career-defining triumph, her mind wasn't on the Nobel Prize nominations or the newspaper headlines. She was standing in a tenement apartment filled with the smell of cabbage, feeling the ghost of a little girl's desperation. She was on a ship, crossing a dark ocean, clinging to a promise. She was in a noisy factory, her fingers aching, tucking a few precious coins into a tin box. She was holding her son's hand, telling him his own hands were meant for books. Her discovery was not just a data point on a screen, it was the final intricate stitch in a tapestry woven over a century. It was the answer to a prayer whispered in a Bulgarian factory. The American dream, for her family, had evolved. For Elena, it was the dream of survival and safety. For Michael, it was the dream of education and belonging. For Anya, it was the dream of exploration and understanding, the ultimate luxury, bought and paid for by the relentless, humble labor of those who came before her. A few months later, Anya stood at a podium in a university auditorium, giving a public lecture on her team's discovery. The hall was packed. At the front sat her father, his face beaming with a pride so immense it seemed to radiate warmth. Beside him, in a wheelchair, sat Elena, dressed in her finest clothes, looking small and frail beneath the grand architecture of the hall. After the presentation, during the Q&A, a young student in the back raised her hand. "Dr. Sharma," she said, "your passion is so clear. What was it that first inspired you? What motivates you to spend your life looking at the stars?" Anya paused, her hand instinctively going to the thimble in her pocket. She smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression. "I'd love to give you a simple answer about the mysteries of the universe," she began, her voice clear and steady. "And that's part of it, of course. But my motivation started long before I ever looked through a telescope. It started with my grandmother." She gestured toward the front row. "Nearly a century ago, she came to this country alone, with nothing but a promise to her family. She worked in a garment factory, and her hands, which should have been creating beautiful things, instead worked day and night just so her family could have a chance. She sacrificed everything so that her son, my father, wouldn't have to work in a factory. He became a teacher, and he used his life to fill my head with stories and ideas." She looked from her father to her grandmother, then back at the audience. "They built a world for me where I wasn't limited by circumstance or necessity. Their work, their sacrifice, gave me the freedom to not have to look down at the ground, struggling to survive. They gave me the incredible privilege of being able to look up at the sky and wonder what's out there. My work isn't just about finding new planets. It's about honoring their journey. It's the fulfillment of a dream that began with a simple silver thimble and ended, impossibly, among the stars." The auditorium was silent for a beat, and then it erupted in applause. But Anya was only looking at Elena. Her grandmother couldn't hear the details, but she saw her granddaughter on that stage, powerful and brilliant, and she understood. She simply nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture of acknowledgement. A final, silent stitch completing the design. The promise was kept. The dream was real. What an incredible journey, right? From a small town in Bulgaria to the stars themselves. It just goes to show you how the ripples of one person's courage can travel across generations. I'd love to know what you think. What part of this story, Elena's sacrifice, Michael's sense of duty, or Anya's final achievement, resonated with you the most? Every family has a story of strength and dreams, and if you feel comfortable sharing a piece of yours, the comments section is a place for us to honor them together. Reading your stories is truly one of the best parts of what I do. If this story moved you or gave you a moment of inspiration, please take a second to click the like button. It's a simple gesture that really helps support the channel and tells me that these are the kinds of stories you want to see more of. And of course, If you don't want to miss out on our next video, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We have so many more dramatic and thoughtful journeys to share, and I'd love for you to be here for them. Thank you so much for spending your time here today. In a world that can often feel chaotic and uncertain, remember the strength that lies within our own histories and the hope that is passed down to us. May you find peace in your own journey and hold on to the light of the dreams you're building. Until next time.